students, we're going to move forward with learning about functions. And so remember when we first started programming, I told you that we would learn more about other functions besides the main function. In any program we've worked on so far, we have int main, and main is a function. And in C++, that tells the system that this is the main function. Okay, so this is the one where the system starts out. But if I scroll back up with the program I have right now, you'll see that I have some things up here that are not normally there. So as usual, we start out with our comments. There's my name. You would put your name, then the program description and the date. Our include statements for our header files, okay, using namespace. And now we've got a couple functions here. This is a function, and the name of the function is larger. And I'm going to describe, see these letters A, B, C, they're all in comments because it's helping me describe what these functions do. So I'm going to scroll down just a little. I want to make sure you can see A, B, and C. All right, so void. Void is a description of the data type that this function will have. And it could be an integer, it could be a double, it could be a string. In this case, it's a void because when this function actually finishes, it's not going to send a value back down to main. If it was going to send a value like an integer back to main, then I would have to put int here, okay, because it's going to send a value back to the main program to do some work with that value. But in this program, all I want to do is print out something. If number A is greater than B, print out number A is larger. Else, number B is larger. So I'm just printing something to the screen. I don't want to send a value back to main, so I put void. Void meaning it doesn't have a value that goes back to main. So this is the return type. Return type meaning returning back to main, what type of data will it return with? And it will return with nothing, so it's void. This is the data type of the value returning to main from the function. It could be integer, double, string, and void means no return value. Okay, so we're not sending a value back to main. B, right here, larger, right here, this is the name of the function. Larger, I picked that name. It's like any other variable. It's a function name, so naturally it can't match any other variables I'm using. It has to be its own variable name, but in this case it's not called variable, it's a function name. So this function is void, it doesn't return any value back, and it's called larger. If it was returning an integer back, then it'd have int larger. So int is the data type, and larger is the function name. And then the items in the parentheses, remember in main, int main, there were parentheses. Well, nothing would happen here, right? There's no value for main. We want it empty so we can do whatever we want in that program. But up here, it's getting a value from main. Main is sending a value, and num A will have something in it, some kind of number. And num B will have some kind of number in it, so that this function then can take that number and compare. Is this one greater than that one? If it is, then say it's larger. Else, say the other one's larger. So these values actually bring a value from main into my function. So these are the values being sent to the function to do its job. So main is sending a value to the function so the function can do its job. Okay? All right, so here's another one. We have a string. And that is what? That is right here, part A. This is the return type. So the return type is going to be a string. And the name of my function is called name. So I have string name, and then these are the values coming from the main program, main function. It's going to have my name, first name, and it's going to be holding my last name. And then I want it to return, see, I'm going to return back to the main program. I want it to return first name, which is Nan, plus a space, plus last name, so plus Harold. I'm telling this function, go back to main and return with Nan plus a space plus Harold. So this function returns a string data type back to main. Now this right here, I'm declaring a variable. I don't use this in my program. I just wanted to show this to you. Now that you're learning about functions, you need to know about local variables. So here, string, fname, lname, full name, and int a, these are local variables because they are inside of this int main function. But notice this variable, int mcds equals 0. It's not inside of this function because here's the end of this function. Here's the beginning. These little curly brackets show the beginning and end of that function. And here's the beginning and end of that function. So this little declared variable, it's not inside of a function. So it's called a global variable. It's outside of int main. It's outside of any other function. All right, so it is a global variable. So this variable works in all of the functions. It works no matter what function you use. But the functions inside of int main only work in int main. Okay, so these are local variables. So if they're declared inside of int main, they work in int main. If they're declared outside of any function, then they work in all of the functions, okay? All right, so here we're defining declaring our variables. We got a string first name, last name, and full name variables. And then int a. I don't think I needed that. I think I changed my program. But in any case, I'm going to get rid of that. I don't need it. All right, now I want to see out, enter your first names. So I would type in Nan, right? And then it would see out, enter your last name. So I would type Harold. And then I would say full name equals Nan, parentheses, first name, comma, last name. This is where I am, and I'm going to put a comment here, calling the function. All right, so I have a function up here called name, right? So I'm saying, where is it? Full name is going to equal name. This is my function. First name, comma, last name. And inside of my function here, I say, hey, whatever they typed is fname. So fname plus a space, and whatever they typed was last name, right? Harold. So in here, this function is doing the work. And all I'm doing down here is calling that function to do that work for me. And then I'm going to see out your full name is, and then I type full name because full name was defined in this function right here, which is outside of main, above main, okay? And then it prints full name. The local variable is known only in the area of the program where it's declared. So these are local variables for int main. The global variable is known everywhere throughout the entire program. It's declared outside of any function. We just talked about that. That's some notes for you guys. A function is a subprogram that exists outside of main. In this case, I put my functions before int main. Here's one and here's one. They are before the int main function, okay? There is a way to put them after int main, and what you do, you just list this function title right here, and then you put the function title and everything that happens in the function after int main. But you still have to list just this little first line of the function so that the program knows there is a function. And then you can put the whole big part of the function after int main if you want the functions to be on the end. We'll talk about that later. So a function is a subprogram that's outside of main. It is called when needed. Here inside of int main, right here, I called this function name first name, last name, right here. This right here calls that function. And up here we said string name, there's that function. Notice I had to define these variables for this function, okay? Because these are only local. Okay, so we define them, we put them together with a space, and then we come back and full name becomes that. Okay, so that's using that function up there. We do this because a lot of times some functions might be really big, really long, and so we can make int main smaller and just have functions that we can use over and over again. And we could use those functions and not have to retype that programming over and over. We pass information to the function does some kind of task, and if needed, it can come back with a value, okay? We can return any variable type we discussed this semester, like an integer, a double, a float, a character, a string, a bool. Sometimes we have nothing to return. If that's the case, it's called a void. We can only return one value from a function, or nothing. So we return one value or no value at all. That's all a function can return. All right, here's another part of our main, right? This is still in main. Int num A, num B, and number. So here I am declaring three variables. One's called num A, num B, and number. Then I cout, enter a number, and that'll be num A. So if I type 3, okay? Then cout, enter another number. Let's say I type 2. Here's that function. Remember that function that we talked about at the first part of this video? So I'm going to go back up to that function. I'm calling that function. I won't bring back a value. But what I will do, I'll compare the num A and num B that I typed in. And if num A is bigger, I'll say num A is bigger. And we'll type whatever that number is. Else, num B is bigger, is larger. So it'll type that number. So this is the function. This will happen because of the fact that I called it. This is calling. This calls the void larger function. And in the print part is inside the function, so it'll print on the screen because of that function. All right, and that's the end of this program. So study this. This is a little more complicated than what you're used to. We're learning about functions outside of main and how main calls those functions and uses those when you need them. All right, so study up. I'll be talking some more about functions in the next lesson.